Welcome back to The Apex, a weekly conversation with the titans and tastemakers of the automotive world. This week, our guest is engineer, classic car specialist, photographer, and journalist Laura Kukuk. With a background in high-level sports car development and a fascinating job as an expert authenticator of some of the world's finest vintage automobiles, she's a Nürburgring native who also enjoys getting hands-on in the workshop with her own restoration projects. Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
So could you tell us a bit more about your background? How did you get into cars initially, and how did you end up in the classic car world?
Well, I got into cars through my father. So he is a classic car specialist since over 45 years. And I kind of grew up with classic cars. So it was always classic cars in our garage. He always drove them as a daily, as I do now. And I couldn't resist the love for classic cars or in general automotive. So we spent a lot of time in the garage just working on the cars as well, get hands on, where I really got into engineering and this kind of like technical side.
Cool. So a childhood thoroughly immersed in cars then?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you worked at Porsche Kramer Racing and DP Motorsports in your school holidays. I've read that somewhere. And later you became a development engineer at McLaren Automotive, and you worked on the 570S and the McLaren Senna, amongst others. So as an engineer, what excited you about those environments?
Well, it's like the modern technologies and the developing of new ways of transporting. And it's just, if you're an engineer, you are interested in the technical bits. It's not just the historical, it's the same as the modern technologies. And especially with super sports cars, it's always been like racing. You just said Nürburgring native. So racing has always been part of my hobby and my interest. So being in super sports cars is as close as it could get with like automotive cars. And I think the developing new technologies and new ways of transporting is just something really incredible. The same with like new ways of rather than a petrol engine now, like electric or these kind of things. So I think moving from racing, the McLaren was the next step as close as I could get to it. So it was a really cool time, especially being in the development area at McLaren, which was cool. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how does working on classic cars differ from that? I presume that at McLaren, you were constantly dealing with new materials, new technologies, whereas with classic cars, it's kind of perhaps more instinctive. There's a lot more elbow grease involved, a lot more handiwork. Could you kind of tell our listeners about what it's like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's more hands-on, of course, but at the same time, my job isn't like on a daily basis. I'm not working on the car. It's not like a restoring business, but I think the main difference would be for me to work in one or the other areas that with modern cars, I was able to create something which I actually would see on the road driving along. So for example, with the 570S, I designed like the ceiling on the rear, nothing big, but quite cool to know there's like a part of you designed as driving around. Mm-hmm. So, this is never going to happen with me. Now I chose the way to go into the classic car world or into the authentication world, for that instance. So I still deal with classic cars, with modern cars and super sports cars, but I always look at them. I'm not taking part in designing them, obviously. Mm-hmm. So it's more about their history and about what the car has to tell, their own story almost, rather than forming it. Yeah, sorry.
And speaking of that, I mean, because you and your father, you're well known for kind of bringing modern scientific tools to bear on car authentication. So could you tell us a bit about what you do in that respect and the various methods you use to find out, let's say, the true stories of the vehicles you look at?
Yeah, it's always in addition to the history research. So it's not necessarily the true story, but it's verifying it maybe or finding new ways, like new historical aspects. We use a lot of forensic methods, and it's it's for bringing the objective perspective into it almost, like rather than a subjective, because it's a very subjective world. And we use, for example, like spectroscopy. Sorry, my English pronunciation is a bit wrong. But basically, that's just helping us to analyze the material in its elements, which then helps us to date back the material. So we could, for example, say that the frame we're looking at of a car is from the 70s rather than from the 80s, or is, basically built yesterday rather than it should have been in the 20s or something like that. And the same works then with ultrasonic. With ultrasonic, we can measure the thickness of material as well as paint thickness on, for example, glass fabric or like fiberglass or carbon fiber. So then we use ways to identify the numbers, like stamping. We all know these famous words, matching numbers, and where it all comes from is it's a really big deal, especially when you're talking about the value of a car. So we all need to look at the car, and we always need to verify whether it's matching numbers or not, just because the market is asking for it. So, for instance, the stamping you have on a car doesn't need to be the original stamping, right? We all know of that as well. And there are ways you can analyze it. And it used to be very destructive. So it used to be with like acids where you needed to just destroy almost a number to see whether another number would be stamped underneath or something. And now you can do it non-invasive, which is really cool. And these kind of methods, like there are many more, but they all help us to basically look at the car from all certain angles and just collect together the whole history and bring it alive almost. Yeah.
That's interesting. So would you say that this authentication technology has changed over the years? You mentioned that before it was maybe slightly destructive, and that might maybe cause an owner to be a bit hesitant about applying these methods to something that they treasure so much.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad that I did have change. So, for instance, I was writing up a report of an SSK my dad examined about 25 years ago, and back then he examined the car, I think 15 times or something, and the car was ripped apart completely onto bare metal frame.
Wow.
So just for this inspection, just to make sure whether the car is completely original or not. And obviously there were indications it wasn't what it was supposed to be. So that's why you're going down that route. And back then you actually needed to take like material out of the frame to send it into the laboratory to do the spectroscopy in order to identify the material. The same, you needed to use acid in order to identify the stampings on the frame. And today we're able to do it basically everything non-destructive and transportable. So we're able to go wherever in the world at any time and almost say it on spot what the car is going for without waiting for really long results. So it's making our job much easier, and obviously the same for the customer. So yeah, you don't need to rip the whole car apart or take parts out of the car in order to send it somewhere. I can bring the material or the machines to the car and do it on spot, almost non-invasive, which is really cool. And obviously technology is just moving forward. So I think a lot of new ways are coming in the future as well.
That's really interesting, especially the kind of perspective it might give you on authenticity. If it's so much easier to check, then perhaps people would think twice about trying to fake it, I suppose. But have you ever encountered attempts to disguise or conjure up the heritage of a vintage car? And what's your personal opinion on what really makes a car authentic? Because I know that's quite a kind of contested phrase, I think, depending on who you ask in this world.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. But answering your first question, whether I've encountered it, yes, I mean, very often. But it doesn't always need to be. I mean, we're all talking about fake cars. I think the word fake, for example, is a very difficult word. Just because fake has so many different
connotations. Yeah.
Yes, to it. It's just
absolutely.
It's always a matter of definition, and I encounter wrong historical identifications or like a wrong like, for example, someone who would sell a car now would tell me some sorts of history, or some sorts of history, and it's quite frequent that I find out a different idea. So it's not very rare, but to what extent the story is different, that obviously varies. But regarding authenticity and when a car is authentic, I think it is authentic when you say what it is. So, for instance, we all know that there are people out there who make a complete replica from their car they have, just to obviously enjoy it as well, without destroying historical value. So they have the original car in their garage and they make a complete replica of it just to enjoy that car as well, without destroying anything when they go racing, for instance. So is that car less authentic? Yes, it's less authentic in terms of it's not the car it's supposed to be, but it's not the other car, but it looks the same. But someone would say, hey, this is a replica, so it's as authentic as it could be because someone says what it is. But if someone goes along the way and now says, this is actually an original car, that obviously is wrong. And that's completely not authentic. So, yeah, sorry.
That's interesting. I was going to actually ask, does it ever work the other way? So if someone's doing one of these, let's call them recreations, and they might kind of wonder about what the specific detail they need to have in order to make it, just believable or done correctly. Did you ever advise on that sort of thing?
We do, but we do it very reluctantly. And it's never, we encountered or what we experience actually is that it's never the person who builds it or the person who says, who has it built for himself or herself. It's always like the next owner along the way, or the force owner along the way, who's making it more original or putting originality to it without ever being built back in the day, kind of thing. So yes, I mean, of course, people are trying to do their best at their job. So the person who's doing the replica is obviously going, or the recreation, but they're going to try to do the absolute best, because they are going to be proud, and that's what they asked for. They asked to do that, and if it's a good restorer, they will do the best they can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not wrong from them doing it. It's as long as it's being identified as what it is.
Yeah, and all done honestly.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So, and you're a recognized name in the field and a judge at various car events like Pebble Beach and Villa d'Este. Do you ever feel a certain pressure whenever you're asked to authenticate or give your opinion on a particularly prestigious or rare or exciting car?
Yes, but actually much more in my engineering role as a classic car specialist than a judge. Not much more, but in another way. Like, for example, if I go out and examine a car and I write a report, I have like 100% liability for it. And I mean, it's obviously the same when you're going out there and you're a judge at a concours and you say something. It's obviously the same. Like there is a liability to it. So I always take my job very seriously, and I would never go out and just say something about a car with like reading a history file just one way. Like, I would always look at a car from like all sorts of angles. I would always get in contact with the manufacturer and try to have different sources. I think like it's the main job, and have a network, talk to people, like get into it, try to find out as much as possible. And then the same, like, then obviously we prefer to bring an objective perspective into it. And that's why we use the scientific methods and forensic methods to have additionally some more information, which is just black and white. There's no interpretation to it.
Mm-hmm. And so are there any particular cars that you remember being a particularly interesting or lengthy authentication process, or where you had to do a lot of research? I'm just wondering what some of your kind of highlights might have been.
Oh, many. I mean, to be honest, it's nothing so rare. Like 2 weeks ago, I was in Italy, and it's a car which, it's like a really rare Ferrari, and this is like a car which is completely taken apart for that examination as well. It's like a long process to get into it and to get all the information we need. And it's sometimes you have a very big case, but you can get it done with proper research. It's just going quicker. We mainly, like a few weeks back was a 2.7 RS. We all know them, and we all know that there are more built, like currently more on the roads than ever been built, because they're still getting produced.
How lucky we are.
Yes, but it's obviously, that's a car which I feel like I'm probably able to authenticate much quicker than a car we obviously do less often, let's say it like that. But at the end of the day, I would never like say, this is going to be an easy car, because every car has its individual history and its individual past. So maybe there were accidents involved or not, and you need to look at every single part. So it's the same with the frame. Like, for example, a frame, you can't just look at the back and say the whole frame is original. You need to look at every single like piece between weldings. As soon as you have a welding, could be a new part of the frame, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And also something you mentioned earlier about people and how important they are in this process. How much of your time is spent just having to, as you say, work with people, get 3 or 4 different versions of the truth and kind of try and find a way through it? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
It's a lot of time. I mean, when we get asked to examine a car, we try to get all the information, the person who's asking us to do the examination, but then we would see, that's that and that brand. So we would go to the network we have with that brand involved, and we would go to the manufacturer if they have like a classic car department. We would try to get original drawings if we don't already have it. Like my dad's been doing it for 45 years, so we have quite a big archive. But and then we would just talk to everyone we know would have been involved, and maybe reach out to people we have not encountered yet. So it's not like we could know everyone, but it's all about this, and it's like we very much like to work with like a corporation thing almost. I mean, it's a very small world, this classic car world, and it's a very passionate world, and we are all in the same boat. So as much networking and as much communication is going on, the better is for everyone, really. And that's how we try to live that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, talking of people, a theme we've discussed on this podcast quite a lot over the last couple of months is inclusivity, and how the classic car community is looking to maintain that love and interest in classic vehicles in the future. How do you think we can draw in new enthusiasts and keep passion for cars and engineering alive?
I think make it accessible. Like it's sometimes I feel people who are not in that world feel like it's a closed world almost. So they sometimes come with open arms to me and say, nice that you talk to me, and nice that you're like taking us along your way. And it's like, well, it's like once you're in it, it's actually a very, very positive, very passionate world, but it sometimes seems that people are trying to access it. So I think the more we show and introduce people into this and invite people to come along and share the passion, and I think the other most important thing is the classic car world isn't like it shouldn't be like high-end super expensive cars. It should be all about the passion. I mean, people are coming to me and say, would you examine my I don't know, MGTD? And I was like, yes, of course I would examine your MGTD. And it's like, well, you always just talk or we always just see really high-end cars. And it's like, no, I'm looking, I'm restoring a Fiat 600 worth nothing, but it's like worth the world to me, because it's just like, it has a really great history, and I'm restoring it, and it's all about passion. And this is what every car is about. So it's not about the value of the cars, and it should be about everyone who's passionate about it, and every car.
Yeah, I think it's right to say that classic cars, it's not all 250 GTOs flying around.
No,
it's like for example, the way that Alfa Romeos of a certain age have just become really popular recently because they were, the next best affordable thing that you could buy or you could actually afford. And of course, prices and values have gone up, and that market is maturing. But it's really interesting how people grab onto these things. And as you say, it's not necessarily about an ancient Aston Martin that's been driven for 50 miles and is in a box somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it shouldn't be. And I think this is what we should communicate more, that it's about every single piece of the car. Is like even like it's like a 2CV. I don't know. In German we call it Ente. 2CV. Yeah. So that car is like nothing special. But if you drive around it with with a Morris Minor, I'm driving around since 2 months as a daily. Everyone is going crazy. Like literally, people are waving me while they're and they nearly fall off their bikes because they're so distracted by that car.
Yeah.
And the same is with social media. I mean, I really enjoy now sharing it on social media, because beforehand I was just like, it's my daily. I'm just driving it as a daily. It wasn't nothing special for me until I started to see the reactions, and people are like, wow, you drive it as your daily. I'm like, yes. But it's something special. It's not normal. So it's nice to share this. And I think this is what we should all do. Just share the passion and include people, and not just 250 GTOs, although we do enjoy them as well.
When one turns up, you're like, oh, I like that as well.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind driving that one either.
Yes, exactly. So aside from your day job, I guess you're also, of course, a talented photographer and a journalist. So what made you pick up the camera and the pen?
Same thing, really. Just to make it more accessible, talk about it, show this world and from a different perspective. I mean, obviously I'm a woman, so not that many women are out there. And I think it's always a kind of different perspective. And the same, actually, just a selfish one, just to look at the cars from an aesthetical point of view, because I often get lost in the technical details. And I grew up very creative, and I grew up with a camera. My dad gave me my first Nikon very, very young age, and I grew up with that. So one day I just thought, you know what, I need to bring some more creativity back into my world, and just started to do it. And I think the combination was working quite well, and I really enjoyed that. I'm still enjoying it, but obviously we're all under lockdown, so it's not that much happening really.
Yeah, I was going to say that it hasn't really helped tell all of these interesting stories, but they're out there in garages at the moment, and I hope they'll be on track soon.
Yeah, such sad. I mean, like the past year's been a nightmare, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, I hope that later this year we'll all be back together, enjoying these cars as they should be.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
So I had some quick fire questions to end the interview with. So my first one is, if you had to recommend one old-timer car for a jolly trip around the Nürburgring, what would it be?
Around the Nürburgring? 917. Porsche 917.
I was wondering whether you were going to say Morris Marino or something like that.
Well, for a jolly trip.
I think a 917 would be an extremely jolly, if brief, trip.
Excuse me. Yeah, jolly trip. I mean, really, I'm dreaming once my 600 is finished. I'm dreaming about driving that for the Mille Miglia because it's Mille Miglia eligible. So I think maybe test driving it on the Nürburgring wouldn't be a bad idea beforehand.
Oh, very good. And so my second question is, what is your favorite tool or scientific implement that you enjoy using most when you're in the workshop or you're authenticating?
What I'm enjoying most is actually the spectrometer. Spectrometer, I think, is actually the real word. I'm enjoying that the most, but the most useful one, which I can get the most information out, is actually the ultrasonic. That's obviously authentication wise, and then in the workshop, many. I don't know. Maybe we just stick to the ultrasonic.
Cool. And my final question is, what has been your single life's best driving experience?
Oh God, this is very difficult.
It's a huge question. I'm sorry, but we had to ask.
Oh, I should have thought about that earlier.
Well, whatever's instinctively comes to the front of your mind is good enough.
You know what? I just posted a photo of me driving the Ferrari 166 we inspected back in 2017. Yeah, I believe, because in 2018 was RM. I just posted a photo of that, and that was after 2 days of very long inspection and really great work. We got to test drive the car. We usually do, but then we got to test drive it properly on the road, and I was like the happiest kid ever. So that's like the first thing which comes to mind. It's not the best driving experience ever, but this is the one which comes to mind now. Okay,
well that's a wonderful note to end on. Laura, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Hector. It was really great to be with you.